Kia ora, and welcome to the Beer Jerk Beer of the Week Drink Along. I'm Luke, and this week we're drinking a beer from one of my favourite breweries, 8 Wired. It is Maverick, an American stout. 8 Wired are one of my favourite breweries because they make really fantastic beer, mainly. They also happen to be really, really lovely people. And they also make fantastic beers in the sort of styles that I enjoy drinking. Obviously, they do a great lager, and they do really great hazy pale ales and New England IPAs because they're a business and they make money. But they also brew a lot of beer styles which are a bit less fashionable and a bit less popular because that's what Søren, who's their founder and head brewer, wants to drink. So 8 Wired have... It's hard to drink and chat on these things. It was so much better when I had a second person. Hey, Matt. So I could do a bit of drinking while in between while he was chatting. Anyway, they have a huge barrel aging program at 8 Wired. Possibly the biggest in the Southern Hemisphere. It might be close with Garage Projects down in Wellington and Boat Rocker over in Melbourne, who also have big barrel programs. But yeah, between the three of them, they're maybe around neck and neck. But yeah, the barrel program at 8 Wired is pretty fantastic. You probably have their Feijoa wild beer, but also just a whole bunch of really interesting barrel aged Belgian style beers, different funky stuff and sour stuff. Also things like iced out, which is just a pretty iconic, huge, big stout. And recently it's been really cool. They've been doing the just a really nice series of European-inspired beers. So there's like a Lupolo, which is an Italian Pilsner. They've got a really gorgeous Saison. So it's cool that they're making those beers accessible to people in New Zealand. So getting on to this beer, Maverick is an American stout. You've probably had a stout before. You may even have opinions about stout and the differences between stouts and porters. The difference between stout and porter changes depending on who you're talking to or what you're reading. Going back in history, so I won't linger on it because they're kind of interchangeable terms these days. Everyone and every brewer and in different regions, they have different thoughts on the difference between stouts and porters. But historically, the word stout was just simply used to denote a stronger beer. So porters became more and more popular, so then the phrase stout porter was used in London. So that would be a stronger kind of porter, which was used for a dark beer. And then after a while, stout only was used in reference to darker beers. But originally, it would have been bitters and all kinds of styles would be described as stout if they're boozier. So these days, the general consensus in our little bit of the beer world is that stouts are a bit more robust than a porter. So they might have more characterful roasty malts in there and perhaps slightly higher alcohol, which is why you don't really see imperial porters, it's more imperial stouts. But this American variety on the stout, which has its own BJCP set of guidelines, came about in the 80s and 90s when the craft beer revolution in the US really heated up, and that was not too far after homebrewing became legal in America, and little craft breweries started popping up everywhere, which were they took the inspiration from the English real ale breweries. So of course, porters and stouts were some of the most interesting styles that have been made in England, especially. So to make it American, the Americans put more hops in there. And really, in a nutshell, that is the difference between, and it's the same in other different beer styles. So you'll have an American wheat beer or an American pale ale. It just means it's more hoppy. So this has a lot more hoppy character than you would have in a traditional English real ale type stout. And here it's been hopped with Centennial, which is it's a really great all-round American hop. You can use it in all sorts of beer styles, but it works nicely here. There are nice citrus characters and nice pine characters. that just really work well in tandem with the malted barley in here, with the sort of slight roastiness. It can be difficult getting that balance. You'll see in a lot of black IPAs, for example, often they skew too far one way or the other way, and it'll be too much coffee notes or too roasty, or it'll be too bitter. But I really think in this beer, they've done a great job at balancing the profile of the full body. There really is espresso notes in there. There's cacao notes. There's all those lovely dark, complex specialty malt character that you would want in a stout. But the Centennial just really sits above it, and it just gives you the nice, a good bitter finish that keeps you coming back for more. Yeah, really, really great example of a good American stout. So yeah, really happy to see a bit more of this around. I'm not sure if they've made it core range yet, but it's definitely a little bit easier to find than it was when they first released it. And 8 Wired, if you don't know much about their story, so Søren is a Danish guy who moved over to New Zealand, and he was studying something completely different when his wife Monica bought him a little home brew kit, just like a simple, just pour it in the fermenter sort of home brew kit, and that took him on a whole different journey, and he immediately got hooked on brewing, and left university and just didn't bother getting involved in science. He went and got a job. So he worked in brewing. He worked at Renaissance down in Blenheim, and learned everything he could, and made some really great beers while he was there. But during that time, he also started the 8 Wired brand. And to begin with, for a few years, he contract brewed and sort of brewed at different places. And then they decided to make their home up in north of Auckland in Warkworth. And that was about 2009, I think, thereabouts. But immediately, before they even had a physical brewery, they really made waves with Hot Wired, which was, I'm not going to make any statements about the first, because I haven't looked it up, frankly. But it was one of the first American-style, very hoppy, hop-forward pale ales here in New Zealand, and really definitely caused some waves. And I think Iced Out was probably one of the first beers that they brewed as well. If you want to know more about the story of 8 Wired, you could listen to my interview with Søren on the Beer Jerk podcast that I recorded a couple of years ago. I used to do a podcast, which was great, talking to lots of really interesting brewers about all sorts of subjects, but just didn't really have the time for it. So maybe we'll kick off the Beer Jerk podcast again one day. But in the meantime, if you haven't listened to my interview with Søren, I'll have to share it in the email as well. So look out for the link there, but you can just find it in any podcast catcher by typing in Beer Jerk. So look out for that interview with a lot more facts than I've remembered for this chat today. But as I say, great people, great beer. You can now visit their Barrelworks. So separately to the brewery in Matakana, they've got the Barrelworks, which is their tasting room, which is also where they've relocated a whole bunch of their barrels to. So really nice environment when you're up there in Matakana to experience some 8 Wired beers, and they always have their full range up there. Other news from me, it's winter, it's getting colder. This is a lovely beer to drink in colder weather. We don't really heed much towards the idea of seasonal beers. I mean, the Beer of the Week subscription, you're only drinking one beer anyway. It's not like we're forcing you to drink a whole case of beers. So I feel like you can drink dark beers in summer and sour beers in winter. But still, sometimes it is nicer to, you probably don't want to be drinking a rose and hibiscus kettle sour when it's -3 outside and it's chucking it down with snow and you're sat next to a roaring fireplace. So this is a good beer to drink in the winter time. And we've also got a couple of good winter selection mix cases on the Beer Jerk website at the moment. Beers that you're not going to find in the supermarket, beers that are cheaper than the supermarket, and beers that we ship here from Beer Jerk Towers that would arrive with you the following day on our overnight courier. Well, if you're rural, it might take a couple of days, but we pay for a next day service. So if you're in the market for some delicious beers, which you obviously are, you're watching this and you're drinking along, support independent. Support your independent retailer, me and Joe. There aren't many independent retailers in New Zealand because there's a supermarket duopoly. So, yeah, they open and then they close immediately. So it's a bit of a miracle that we've been going for almost 9 years here at Beer Jack. So if you want to find some great beers, grab one of those 2 winter mix cases that we've got online at the moment. And other than that, thank you for joining us. Enjoy this beer. Remember to support your local independent brewery and independent retailers, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.